We're ready. All right. I think we're ready. Let's start. Just check that we're unmuted. Okay, we're good. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space. Thank you for joining us for today's event, which is part of the ELIA Leadership Symposium, one of the satellite events, titled Social Justice, Economic Empowerment, and Arts Education. And to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube live from Fourth Space, located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. We'd like to extend our gratitude to the Kiyunkahaga Nation, who are the caretakers of the lands and waters we are meeting on, for their teachings about the earth and our relation to it. At Fourth Space, we work with our university community to mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities that examine research questions and projects across the university. We're running today's event as a live stream meeting, so we welcome any comments or questions via the chat on Zoom. And for those of you in the space, if you have any questions, we'll get one of our microphones to you during that. And with that, it's now my pleasure to hand it over to our host for the event, for an introduction for this event, Concordia's Dean, the Faculty of Fine Arts, Amneh Gérin. Annie.
Thank you, Doug. So it is just a bit after 2 o'clock in the afternoon here in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, and colleagues online are joining us from time zones across the world. This event is a satellite session of the ELIA Leaders Symposium titled The Beginning of Now, which is also held in person in Manchester, United Kingdom, hosted by Manchester Metropolitan University. ELIA is a globally connected European network that provides a dynamic platform for exchange and development in higher education institutions. Concordia University is an active member of ELIA, and we join them in our advocacy for higher arts education and for the transformative power of the arts in society. Concordia's Faculty of Fine Arts is unique in Canada. Our 9 departments offer an array of programs in visual arts, performing arts, cinema, design, digital arts, art education, creative arts therapies, and specialized studies such as film studies and art history. But one aspect that makes us who we are is our commitment to decolonization, which has a specific resonance in Canada, especially roughly 10 years after the issue of the report of the National Commission on Truth and Reconciliation. We are also committed to social justice and to climate justice. And at Concordia, this commitment takes form in what we teach and how we teach our students, as well as in our research, our creative practices, and our partnerships with various communities. This is precisely why we agreed to participate in this symposium by hosting a discussion set around what we're calling a provocation. Our provocateur is Amneh Shaikh-Farooqui. We chose to focus our discussion around her work, specifically because of her very particular, at once global and very localized understanding of the challenges that we face globally, and also for her insight on the productive intersections of social justice, economic empowerment, and the arts. I will be introducing her a little bit later this afternoon. But in the meantime, I will turn it over to my colleague, Andrew Woodall, who is Concordia's Dean of Students. He will be introducing our panelists. Andrew?
Merci beaucoup, Annie. Quelle belle introduction à les prochaines heures et demie, les prochaines 90 minutes. So I'm Andrew, as you heard, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm way out of my depth, except for the fact that I don't think there's any better force in the world, and the force supported by human beings, for change as art. I really do. I'd do it all over again. I'd do that. So here we are today. And we're really lucky to have an incredible panel with us today, whose research, teaching, and practice connects in various different ways to the subject matter at hand. So Today, for all of you in the room, online, who knows where else, we're joined by Miranda Smitheram, who's an assistant professor of material futures in the Department of Design and Computation Arts here at Concordia. We have Alici Telengut, who's assistant professor of film animation at Concordia's Mel Hoppenheim School of Cinema. We have Juan Ortiz Apuy, assistant professor of critical perspectives on inclusion in 3D art practices in Concordia's Department of Studio Arts. And we have Lavinia Jones, creative and cultural consultant and expert in social innovation and creative economies. All right, I'd ask each of you 2 minutes, keep it short. So who are you in your own words and not mine? And what was it that turned you on about the topic today?
You're all looking at me. Okay, am I unmuted? Yes. Hi, everybody. So yeah, my name is Juan. I was born and raised in Costa Rica. I joined Concordia about 4 years ago. As somebody from the Global South, a lot of the things that we'll talk about and that we'll see in the video are really passionate to me. So I'm excited to talk to you about those. I teach sculpture. I'm an artist as well. Working with installation, my research is quite a bit about materiality and objects and commodity culture, consumer culture. So yeah, I think I'll pass it on to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lavinia, very recently arrived in Montreal, Canada, where I'm delighted to be. For now, I am South African from the global majority. I am very excited about this provocation today. There is so many echo similarities and touch points which are relevant to certainly the Southern Africa and broader Africa perspective. And from my place as a cultural practitioner and enabler and intermediary, it's been extraordinary to walk a path with many practitioners and artists and activists in finding commonalities and shared purpose between art form and activism. So I'm very excited and so wonderful to be on this panel with everyone.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Miranda Smitheram. I'm co-director of the Textile and Materiality Research Cluster at Milieu Institute for Arts, Culture and Technology. And I'm also director of a new lab called MASH, which is Matter and Sustainable Hybridity. It's a place that sort of fills me with joy every day because it gives me opportunities and space to work with research creation, thinking about decolonizing design, incorporating stewardship and other Indigenous ways of knowing into my practice, coming from particularly from a Maturanga Māori perspective, which is Māori ways of knowing, and working with material, particularly material that follows pathways of colonization, such as invasive plant species. I also come from a fashion and textile background and swerved deeply from that to go into research and academia, thinking about globalization, consumption, and future fashion systems. So I was particularly inspired by our provocateur's introduction today, which you'll be seeing shortly.
Hi, my name is Alici Telengut. I'm a newly hired assistant professor in film animation, just started in August this year. Yay! And I studied at Concordia. I did my BFA in film animation, MFA in studio arts. And right now I'm doing my PhD in Potsdam in Germany. So I'm very happy to be back in Concordia again. And my practice is very handmade. I make animated film by hand with different materials under the camera and found objects, etc. And today the panel is very interesting for me because my own research also involves reclaiming indigenous knowledge and wisdom, and also reconsidering the ideas of animism. Yeah, thank you.
Wow, amazing. Let's throw everything else out and just get into this, right? Oh my God. Okay, anyway, before then though, we have some stuff to do. We have a video from Maria Hansen, who's the president of ELIA, who's going to welcome us and set the context a bit for their conference. And then after that, we'll get into it. So over to Maria, wherever she is.
Bonjour à tous. Good day to you all in Montreal. My name is Maria Hansen and I'm Executive Director of ELIA. Montreal is one of my favorite cities. I've visited many times and I have had the privilege of visiting your campus a few years ago. Happy to know you're gathered today in the fourth space at Concordia and of course online. So what is ELIA? ELIA is a community of art universities, art schools, and art academies from all over Europe and the rest of the world. We bring our members together to collaborate and exchange with each other. How do we do that? In many different ways, but most importantly by connecting people who work or study at our member institutions. Just like Concordia University, which is a member of ELIA. Did you know that while you will be talking with each other today, arts educators will be discussing the same themes in person at Manchester Metropolitan University. Through this series of global online events, it is our privilege to bring everyone together for ELIA's Leadership Symposium under the beautiful theme, The Beginning of Now. What is that about? The beginning of now. Considering the many global urgencies, such as the cost of living crisis, armed conflict, ecological emergencies, and social injustice, we know that the way students learn and perceive their role in the future is evolving rapidly. As educators, we face growing pressures. It's not easy to remain authentic in a highly metricized educational market. But how do our students experience the now? ELIA Leadership Symposium 2023 invites you as satellite event participants to experiment, challenge, and exchange as we empower each other to take actionable steps forward. We have invited a number of speakers to Manchester, one of the birthplaces of the Industrial Revolution, a city famed for its artists, music, football, and the splitting of the atom. Each speaker will present a provocation, one of which you will hear today and have the opportunity to respond. We look forward to hearing your thoughts as your input will feed into a real-time global conversation which will form part of the Manchester provocation. So enjoy today and thank you for taking part. If you would like to keep in touch and stay up to date with ELIA activities and the work we do together with our members, please feel free to check out our website and subscribe to our monthly newsletter. Good luck, and remember, this is the beginning of now.
Hi everyone, my name is Shelley McNulty and I'm the Head of Design here at Manchester School of Art at Manchester Metropolitan University. And we're hosting this year's ELIA Leadership Symposium. And we're really excited to have this pioneering satellite event as part of the programme. We're delighted to have you join us in this way because we know creativity is a global endeavour. As the sun sets on one perspective, it rises in another. And it's never been more important for us as leaders in the creative disciplines to set the leadership standard to address the global challenges of our time. We truly believe the beginning is now, and what better place to do it in than Manchester, a city of firsts, which is steeped in a radical history of activism. And it's in this spirit we are grateful to you all for taking part in our satellite event, contributing your time, ideas, performance, and actions to the Manchester provocation. We can't wait to receive your contribution. So from all of us here in Manchester, thank you, and we'll see you very soon.
Okay, so now it's time to meet virtually our provocateur. Her name is Amneh Shaikh-Farooqui. She is an accomplished social entrepreneur and leader based in Pakistan, whose practice focuses on gender, inclusion, and livelihood development with over 2 decades of experience in Pakistan's impact sector. Amneh's work is marked by a deep commitment to amplifying marginalized voices through Indigenous heritage, storytelling, and art in order to drive cultural shift and transformation. She's a curator. She's a curator of the Women of the World Festivals in Pakistan, which is a global movement that celebrates women and girls taking a frank look at the obstacles that they face and discussing solutions for change. She is the visionary founder and CEO behind Polly and Other Stories, empowering Pakistani craft makers. Amneh is also an author and a recognized expert in project design and management, leadership development, economic empowerment, and environmental initiatives. We'll be watching in a few minutes or in a few seconds her recorded provocation, which centers on social justice, fashion, and craft. Through it, she asks us to reflect on what it means to create, to be a gendered subject, and to be a leader. She also asks us to become more mindful about what we purchase, what we consume, and how it impacts communities and the environment. As we watch and listen, I'd like you to think about how Amneh Shaikh-Farooqui's insight resonates with the challenges that are faced by the communities in which you live, whether you live in Jojage, Montreal, or anywhere else across the world. And to think also about how creativity, education, and leadership can be catalysts for social change and social justice. So on this, can we play the video, please?
Hello and good morning. My name is Amneh Shaikh-Farooqui and I am speaking to you today from my home in Karachi, Pakistan. I am going to start by sharing a screen more for myself than you, but it is very awkward to look at your face the entire time you're speaking, especially online. Here we go. Excellent. So for most people in the room today, I assume craft, fashion, and activism are worlds apart. But for me, they are all the worlds that I live in. Craft is sometimes seen as old school, a traditional and often redundant form of making. Fashion, of course, is frivolous, vain, and fun. Activism, meanwhile, is serious work and only properly undertaken by khadr wearing, and khadr is a traditional handloom fabric, radicals who do not dye their hair and hold placards on a weekly basis outside the local press club. But put together, they can be an important tool for change if we want our future to look brighter than it does today. Because by their very nature, fashion and craft are always changing, always evolving, and therefore ripe for disruption or to help us reach sustainability goals. Internationally today, no high-end collection is complete without a behind-the-scenes story on a little-known weaving technique or a furniture brand showcasing the craftspeople sitting around workbenches. There's nothing new about the kinds of product that these studios create. What is new is the desire to reveal the process and the maker and not just the finished object, asserting the value of the human story and the handmade object over machine-made items. On one level, of course, this is a fad. I mean, some years ago when Levi's launched a marketing campaign called Levi's Craftwork to tell the world about one of the most mass-produced items of clothing as craft, I mean, at that, of course, we can safely roll our eyes. But I'd argue that there's something more profound going on. The world has begun to realize that only through making by hand, or at least in a non-mass produced kind of way, by trying and failing and experimenting and repeating, we gain a true understanding of who we are and perhaps even lead more fulfilled lives. Of course, this idea of a craftsperson is highly romanticized and debated, and definitely not a lived reality on the ground in Pakistan, where the designer and the craftsman are often different roles, and one benefits and is lauded where the other is neglected. But there is a growing ethos, much like within the slow food and the slow fashion movements, that craft may have some intrinsic value of its own. We have today a real post-technological, post-digital nostalgia for the pre-industrial. In a culture where cheap, mass-produced goods, we romanticize and yearn for the handmade because we desire quality and something with greater meaning and purpose. And that's not the only benefit that this space has yielded. Artisan and grassroots creative movements have allowed pockets of agency, inclusion, and even resistance for women makers at the margin, particularly in countries like Pakistan and within the larger context of the craft space in South Asia and in Southeast Asia, where women can sometimes be segregated from the mainstream due to socio-cultural norms. So this idea that the arts can be a catalyst for social change and provide innovative approaches for women and communities to lift themselves economically is well understood. But it is often accepted piecemeal with little attention to nuance and detail. And in our discussion, I hope to share lessons and experiences from my work with thousands of women producers, including Afghan refugee artisans across Pakistan, to address existing gaps by creating safe spaces for artisans, particularly women artisans, to become self-reliant while using their traditional skills to generate a decent income. So by modernizing traditional products and skill sets and creating more efficient production or value chains, as well as properly incubating, training, and mentoring small producers, our work has been able to successfully utilize mainstream market mechanism to integrate disenfranchised producers into sustainable industries and to connect them with national and international markets, such that crafts become a reliable source of income for poor, rural, and peri-urban producers. It has, of course, also allowed for the preservation of ancient crafts and skills, which, once they lose value in the market, are often not passed on to a younger generation. So the fluid hierarchies within these women-led spaces allow for the development of a new leadership practice, one which is of particular interest to me and is rooted in collaboration, in community, and care, and of course highlights arbitrary tensions between ideas of what it means to be modern or what it means to be working in a heritage context. These leadership patterns are sometimes contained within the craft itself or within the process of making it, but equally in memory, in lore, and in traditional practice that allows for the intergenerational exchange and learning, and for creation of space for everyone to contribute, regardless of level of skill. But it is also reflected in the challenges that women makers face when dealing with forces much larger and much more powerful than themselves. There is an increasing awareness in, I think, the global South of the perpetuation of the extractive violence of international market systems that can appropriate cultures and the international capitalist establishment that commodify heritage craft while devaluing its value, its identity, and the needs of its makers. This is a difficult conversation, particularly in countries like Pakistan, and especially right now in the sort of inflationary and post-flood environment that we're in, where it is very hard to lean into these complexities because of the desperate need to work on improving livelihoods and access for local artisan communities who are already on the margin, and particularly within these communities for exceedingly talented but completely homebound women artisans and producers who often have no other options available to them. If I was to speak of Pakistan alone, 15% of our 242 million people rely on craft for their livelihoods. Of these, 65% are women and girls. It is rare, and certainly only within academic and privileged spaces within the country, that craft is spoken of passionately and as of something of great value. It is rarely connected to personhood, and only those within rather elite art institutions have the mental space to think about what it means to make, in that there are often clear personal, artistic, or political motivations and implications of being a maker. And it seems key to the process to capture this narrative. This, of course, is quite different to how craft or the cottage industry is discussed in mainstream Pakistan. It is valued as heritage, as a skill passed down through generation, but there is nothing radical about the act of making unless one views survival itself as a kind of activism. Local consumers often see craft as common and cheap and to be replaced with name brand products as soon as the paycheck allows. Poor innovation and lack of design intervention and branding has further cemented this perception, and the average consumer, especially within the cities, see craft as primitive, redundant, and not worth investing in. Lack of pride around the handmade and made in Pakistan labels further compound the issue and have relegated craft to a niche or, in some cases, a low-value local market. Most makers, particularly in rural settings, create not for personal or artistic expression, but to earn a livelihood. For too long, I feel we have all underrated what countries like Pakistan have to offer. We can transform craft to result in economic benefits and a better quality of life, but at the same time move beyond the contribution of crafts, folk traditions, and incorporate and highlight vibrant subcultures and other indigenous manifestations that may be the future drivers of creative expression in the sector. So I ask you, what if the answer lay in redressing structural and power imbalances between dichotomies like urban, rural, male, female, modern, and traditional? The climate crisis, we know, is the result of a patriarchal manner of interacting with the earth and our communities. Does the answer lie then in a female perspective? We know there are ways of doing this that foster leadership, build capacity and skills, and create fairer, more inclusive value chains, while simultaneously stimulating market access for homebound rural artisans and producers in a culturally appropriate manners. In 2004, Anita Roddick, the founder and CEO of The Body Shop, but I speak about its very early days, stated that we must look for leaders where we least imagine them. Let's look for solutions in the foundations, in NGOs, and in alternative media. I understand that The Body Shop, as the brand we know today, has come a long way away from what it started off as. But was this because it was the only way? Is it impossible to scale, or perhaps even survive, without giving up some of the values and politics that drive the work? Is this part and parcel, therefore, of the equation? Anita may have disappointed thousands when she sold The Body Shop to L'Oreal, but there is no denying that she understood something about how we look at making, working with communities and women within these. And there was something she understood about alternative ways of understanding leadership. Is it possible then to rethink colonial ways of knowledge creation and sharing? Can we move from a position of consumption to one of taking responsibility for what we buy? From a position of indifference to one of active engagement and curiosity? Can we move to a position of compassion where we allow each other to be transformed by our interactions? This is something I have seen again and again in my work. The natural ability of women in communal maker settings to set aside dominant and accepted narratives of what power and leadership should look like, and to create inclusive, diverse, and dare I say it, more sustainable alternatives. In my line of work, I see women supporting women, making each other feel seen and heard, working together and being, for the lack of another word, I'll use one of my favorite old-fashioned ones, being kind. Yet at the macro level, this kindness to each other, to their communities, to the earth, is not seen as the kind of leadership that is much needed in our climate-impacted world. To me, this means that we need to move beyond just a decolonization narrative to a indigenization one, and ensure that indigenous ways of knowing, being, doing, and relating to ourselves, to our communities, and to the earth are allowed back into the mainstream narrative. We all know that the global consumption fever is eroding artisanal heritage skills handed down through generations in communities across the world, and of course, of particular significance to us right here in Pakistan. So many people depend on those skills to feed their families, and that right now their future seems completely uncertain. It has always seemed odd to me that craft and artisanship is undervalued in mainstream markets in countries like mine, while historic crafts are collected and displayed in museums and photographed for coffee table groups. Books. It is important that artisan craftsmanship be valued through a partnership of tradition and design that can honor and value both, and that the history and the craft of its makers is centered in the narrative. Because in a global, mass-produced world, true luxury is handcrafted, indigenous, and heritage. For me, these skills are our cultural capital, and I have always thought it extremely unfair that people, especially women with such amazing skills, are not able to feed their families. Honestly, what happened to fast food needs to happen to fast fashion. We need to make it undesirable and very uncool. For me personally, this journey to witness, to work with, and to learn from incredible women who look nothing like I thought a leader would has been one of deep humility and curiosity, and has taught me the value of the very radical act of listening and observing across multiple points of differences and across erased and denied identities. It has forced me to transcend reductionist and traditional academic or sectoral knowledge to try and disrupt some stubbornly persistent Eurocentric values that persist even in my culture of what it means to create, what it means to be a woman, and what it means to be a leader. So today I ask you, transition into a revolutionary and make intelligent choices as creatives and as consumers that help the earth and local communities. So develop a loathing for the superficial, a disdain for conformity, and prize only bespoke. Think about where you shop and how you create. Think about who it impacts. Dress on the outside so people know what matters to you inside, and show everybody that you care about craft, about culture, about the environment. The revolution and the future await you. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to being in the UK very soon.
All right, well, nothing to do now. We can just go home. It's my great pleasure to lead off the discussion that's inspired by this provocation. And there's a lot there. That's the second time I've listened to it, and I heard new things. Couple of things to just think about that came out. The compelling account of the intersections of her work around fashion, craft, and activism. 3 areas that are not always intuitively associated. She mentions that. She points out that we're living in an opportune moment of post-technological nostalgia that poises us to revalue craft and heritage as a way of reinvigorating local economies in places like Pakistan and others, and potentially lifting people out of poverty. But alongside the opportunities are the great challenges posed by the colonial violence of extractive market practices and the underdevaluation of craft practices in the local economies themselves. And she challenges us finally to take action, right, in our personal habits, but in our systems of thinking as well. So with that, you've all already met this amazing panel. They know way more than I do on this. Let's move into it right away. But we'll have the panel popcorning back and forth, I hope. But at some point, we're going to hopefully you online, wherever you are in the world, and all of you in the audience. Yeah, you, I'm looking at you. We're going to have questions, and don't be shy. This is what it's about. We're all going to be learning here, and we'll get somewhere better at the end. And so that we have, we'll be looking at prompts, and we have about 30 to 50 minutes here. So I guess to start it off, I'm going to start it off. Miranda, your work as an artist and researcher spans some of the arbitrary dichotomies that Amneh mentioned, right? Those,
Yeah.
particularly the traditional and the modern. Can you speak to how new technologies and materials have the potential to provoke speculative generative futures for traditional indigenous practices in textile fabrication and design without stripping very value and essence of those heritage practices? And if you don't like that, just do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Like, go for it.
Okay. Thank you for that question. Design obviously as a field carries with it a lot of culpability, and that's something my students struggle with immediately coming into a design degree program where the messaging is almost like we have enough stuff. You're here to learn to make things. We have enough stuff. We've produced way too many. Our practices of producing, manufacturing have caused so much violence on communities and on place. So what do we do now? What exactly are we teaching you here? And something I thought about quite a lot through listening to Amneh's provocation was she mentioned a couple of times things around compassion and kindness. And it's something I've been thinking about a lot recently in terms of art education, because for a long time, I think personally, I felt that critical thinking was the most important skill that could be developed. But teaching in a design program from a sustainability perspective and from a decolonizing perspective, the things that we are encountering and having to incorporate and address within ourselves and within our practices and within our industries that we're going to these people in the room, many will be the future of that industry. You know, how do we make differently? How do we do differently? And the feelings that come along with that, with sustainability, is a lot of guilt. And feelings that come along with climate change is like eco-grief and eco-anxiety. And when we think about these things, these are emotional states. And so in a sense, part of our response needs to come also from emotion. And so I really responded in that talk to Amneh's mentioning of compassion and kindness, because I too had been thinking about what place has emotion in the academy. As artists, we cannot make without emotion, but in thinking through teaching, what place does, have I run out of, no, I've just moved. I just moved too much. What place does emotion have? And thinking through the bigger kind of strategies of methodologies that we can approach sustainable design through, like circular systems, design for disassembly, slow design practices. We really start with understanding of materials from place. And I personally teach that from a position of relationality, of developing your muscle that we all have, of understanding what the relationship of this particular material is to place and to people and what its histories are. And the skills that we teach, or I teach for that in field research, is things like sensing, noticing, witnessing, like deep observational skills. So again, these kind of soft, kind of qualified, you could say, and in large ways, those skills come from Indigenous ways of knowledge and knowing. Those skills are ways of knowledge and knowing, but they haven't been valorized and they haven't been highlighted as being valid and as being necessary. But if we are going to tackle these bigger things of climate justice and our response of grief and anxiety to those things, I think we need to lead with emotion and heart as well. So building ethics of care.
Okay, and now that's amazing, the kindness and then the circular, bringing it all together, so much of what we heard. Does anyone have anything coming up?
Can I follow up with that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I was thinking about, I love the video and the conversation about kindness and all of that. And I was also thinking about the relationship between teaching and activism. And even thinking about like, whether teaching can be a form of activism in one way or another. Like I feel at the fundamental level, teaching or pedagogy, this idea of like, I'll show you how to do something and you'll show me how to do something in exchange is a radical act. Like it's about, reciprocity, it's about exchange. You see students acquire skills and grow and their confidence kind of develop. Like, I teach a sculpture, so you show them how to weld or how to work with wood. And it's like, they feel, well, I'll do my own Reynolds from now on. And you can definitely introduce people to writers and thinkers that will, change how they see the world and how they see themselves in it. So I think it's an enormous responsibility for that, but an incredible opportunity, right? But yeah, this relationship between like teaching and activism or craft and activism, I was thinking maybe about that.
It's interesting, we're already starting to break down those dichotomies a little bit. Does anyone else have anything to pipe in here? Yeah, go ahead, Lavinia, please.
Thank you so much. And it's an extraordinary, passionate story that Amneh has shared with us today. And I think what's really interesting about this conversation now about place, university, being able to be privileged enough or be within a society in which that is often the norm. For the global majority, that's not. And there is definitely the need to find other spaces outside of institutions in which learning can happen and sharing can happen. And how do universities, I would be interested, being a little provocative here, how do universities partner, invite, collaborate, share with spaces that are not formal, with informal spaces that are, and that hold weight, that have value, that are absolutely about the narrative, the story, the intrinsic intergenerational handing down of a skill, a craft, a tool, an idea. In South Africa, some of the tribes that we have there, the act of, and I know all over the world this happens, of learning a craft specifically and then handing that down intergenerationally is a very important part of culture. And it's not only from the perspective of, well, that happens outside of the city. And this idea of urban, rural polarity. And I think what Amneh is actually speaking about are these systemic problems that we have in society, these ideas that breaking down, not just from a decolonized perspective, which he speaks about so radically, but also from the perspective of hierarchy, how, where, and when things are validated, who gets to validate. And she spoke that through very beautifully in the way that she says, to have the craft or to be handmade can either be at the top of the food chain. I've just seen a South African designer being invited by Christian Dior to go and do what he does brilliantly under their label. Okay. And his heirloom fabrics, his name's Tebe Mgugu, is extraordinary. And he's telling stories through textile. And it's very beautiful. So it's either here or it's here, right? And so where's this space where we get to be without the binary of either that or that? And the craft is not just the only place that happens. So expanding outward, how do we change the entire system? And I'm not quite sure. It's going to take a lot of thinking from all areas. It has to be a shift within the ecosystem and the way of being in the world.
Right. Fast food, fast fashion, fast education, right? There we go. Do you have anything that's coming to mind, Alicia? Yeah, come on.
Yeah, I agree with, especially when you talk about this intergenerational knowledge, and also thought about oral history as well. Intergenerational is not just about the crafts, of course, very important. as well as this oral history could be lost. And I worked with a few different indigenous communities around the world. For example, because Amneh talked about this craft in Pakistan, I thought about, originally I'm from Mongolia. My grandmother was living as a pastoral nomad when she was younger. And then they have this craft of making this Mongolian yurt by hand, like from animal wools. And then it's a special skill to make the wool prepared and then building up the yurt in a specific way. And then this skill is like slowly losing because more and more young people, they're moving into cities. And because of climate change, there's a special climate catastrophic phenomenon called Zud. There are different spelling types, like spelling variation, like DZUD probably. So it's like an extreme climate crisis. Like, for example, in the summer, it's super hot, there's no water, there's no rain, so the grass is all dry, no grass growing. And then in winter, all of a sudden, it's super cold, everything's frozen, so animals could die, all the animals could die just within one night. So the nomads they cannot live anymore. They have to start from zero. That's why more and more of them moving to the city. So the traditional way of living is very difficult to pass down to the next generation because of this climate crisis. And another thing is that because I was in Ireland last summer, I worked with the travelers, the indigenous travelers community in Ireland. And they are the largest ethnic, indigenous, culturally as well, ethnic minority group in Ireland. I think they're also in UK, about 300,000. In Ireland, they are like 0.7% of the total population. And they have their own language called Shelta. And then they have another language called they're called themselves Minkare people. So they are like, they are trader nomads people. And then Ireland and the UK governments banned nomadism a few years ago, like officially banned, so they can no longer have their traditional way of living. And so the community suffered a lot from this because all of a sudden they have to locked into a place living in the residence. So their lifestyle has completely changed. And then also the crafts, considering crafts, you said, they have this traditional way of making the carts with horses. All the skills are like slowly losing. And then also the women, they pass down this pockets with beads, because each women, they don't see each other often. Every time they see each other, they give each other a small item. They sew the small button on their pockets. So it becomes like a traditional craft. So this one is also losing. Now it becomes a museum item. Yeah, so that's I wanted to add that.
Is there anything else jumping out at you here?
Yeah,
go ahead, one.
Well, because I was just thinking about what you were saying about, or this kind of like the relationship between the local and the global and the challenges with that, like thinking about appropriation and how a cultural practice gets appropriated. I see this in Costa Rica where it's an economy largely based on tourism at the moment, ecotourism. And then you would have like local handcraft people who make souvenirs. And just the souvenirs is like a really interesting object, but they make them and sell them to other shops for like very few dollars. And there are bosses who are planned to stop at certain shops and then they get resold for like $200, $300 the profit. And then you will have like endless variations of like the baby sloth, of like the red frog in clay, or like, like a dolphin made out of wood or something. And it's like reselling this idea of like the tourist wants that idea. So they're selling that idea to them and perpetuating this kind of like tropical exoticism thing that happens there. So there is that tension that happens where like, yes, these things benefit local handcraft workers there, but at the same time, it comes from other kinds of challenges of how it gets appropriated, how it circulates its images. Yeah.
I mean, this idea of action and that middle space that you talked about, and the kind, like almost the most radical thing we can do is the kindness and the love, right? I mean, we can all control that to a certain extent and how we're giving that out and interacting around it. What are ways that any of you see tangible ways of starting this systems change? Like, from what you're researching, doing, learning. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, so coming back to those sort of skills of like sensing and noticing and witnessing, when we work with materials and design, we start with trying to really understand on a deep level the material's properties. What's its agency? What's it capable of? What are the stories told through this material? What's the sociocultural histories of this material? What potentiality does it hold? And coming into a relationship with it in a different way to industrialized modalities of repetition, perfection, and price point, right? So from a slow design perspective, one of the things that we've been learning about in class today with making inks from particular plants and charcoal and rubbish and polluted water is thinking through the origins of those materials and the behaviors of those materials. And then when we come into that sort of sense of relationship and understanding of that material, we have a different reverence for it in a different way. So in this sense, like slow design asks of us this whole different way of appreciating something, right? That we have to recognize that as part of it having a material, having agency, means it's going to fade, it's going to perish, it's not going to be permanent, it's not going to last forever because it hasn't come through an industrialized process. So if something is of natural origin, it decays, it perishes, it breaks down, it goes back into a ecosystem. So part of that as designers is thinking through how we then design for things to do that. Yeah, and that's always a really interesting question. But that value question comes into it in the beginning, where it's really hard to sort of, I guess, teach, and it would be really interesting to hear from my students in the room about what is the value of the beauty of imperfections. How do we come into relationship with things that carry with it a maker's mark or some tangible essence of the materiality itself? How do we appreciate that when we've been conditioned to see things as disposable, to see things as perfect until they break and then they're of no use? So different ways of thinking.
Yeah.
So I think firstly, younger people, not that old, but I'm a little old. Younger people have a lot more access, and they're so much smarter. Like they seeing things, they consuming things, they're making different choices. I'm not saying everybody, but there's a lot more access to understanding. Well, hold on, if I go and purchase this Shein product, what does that look like and what does that mean? So just from a fashion perspective, and there's a lot more information accessible. But two very practical things that I've seen is that there is an incredible organization, a part of university. It's an academic program in South Africa called Drama for Life, and it's part of the University of Witwatersrand, also known as Wits University. And they have essentially decolonized the healing arts modality and practice within indigenous knowledge systems from across Africa. And they have that as a part of their teaching within arts therapies, drama therapies, etc. And what has happened is that even all the way up to the Health Professions Board, there is the healing arts, which is now, it's an intrinsic part of South African way of being. In 1994, as some of you may or may not know, we went through a massive transition and we went into a form of into democracy. And the arts and culture sector was charged with the soul of the nation. It was a part of our white paper, that's our policy document. It was the responsibility of the cultural and arts sector for nation building and transformation. And that's a radical act. And what we saw, and in the last 30 years, there has been, I mean, I could give you so many different examples of what that looks like and how kindness is found in those spaces. But bringing it to this land in Canada. I also am associate with an equitable organization called Flourishing Startups, and they are looking at new business models for regenerative systems for early stage entrepreneurs across the social sector and creative sectors. And they're looking at, it's not about scaling. What does it mean to have enough, and how are we doing good for people, place, and planet? Yeah.
Drama for Life, was it at WITS?
Drama for Life at
And
WITS.
Flourishing Startups.
And
Okay.
Flourishing Startups. There we go.
Anyone else about this idea? What can we do? The action we can do right away? No?
Not exactly
No.
that.
Okay.
but
Then take it somewhere else.
Yeah, not exactly that, but I was thinking maybe somewhat in a bit of a tangent, but about the value of the handmade that you were mentioning. And I was thinking about kind of like embodied knowledge. You know, like I was reading this book by Richard Sennett called The Craftsman. And then he says that in English, for example, when you say to grasp something, that it means obviously to cognitively comprehend it, but also to physically grasp it. And this question about like thinking with your hands, for example. And I love the question of like, you know, what does the hand know that the mind doesn't, kind of thing. So like just thinking about that a little bit, like about, you know, the ability of a craft person to think with their bodies and with materials. Like, you know, you would see a woodworker's ability to think with the grain of wood or the width of the blade for the table. So I love that kind of knowledge. And I feel like we as consumers are generally kind of alienated from the means of production. So I think that there's like so much value and so much enthusiasm that we normally feel towards making something by hand, because it's like a way of understanding things. I even think that like something like unboxing videos, like that huge phenomenon happens because people feel alienated from things, and it's a way of describing things and narrating things and stretching to try to understand them a little bit better. But yeah, just the handmade, the value of the handmade.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so in my practice, most of my work is handmade, and but in animation, mostly in these days, we talk about animated film. We think about 3D animation or very other technology, new technology coming up. But I agree that in my practice, I think that there is important to recognize the non-human and the personhood of the non-human, including like, for example, stones, plants, trees, like indigenous worldview, as well as in our time maybe recognition of technology as a personhood, as agency. But at the same time, I'm not very agree with the idea that there's this utopian world where there's a technology fix of everything. I don't agree with that, even though in my practice I recognize the agency of technology. So and for example, in my work, everything is made by hand, and in my last project, I collaborated with lots of stones. It's so funny to say collaborated, but it's kind of true. So and a friend of mine, she grew up in the Alps, and then she collected lots of crystals. Because she really grew up there, she know where to find them by hand. So she hand harvested the crystals, and I got the feel from my friend. And then the crystals were part of my project, reimagining the formation of Lake Baikal in Siberia. Because to this region, I cannot go there anymore. So I'm just finding other objects in my life somehow to reimagine a place that I cannot go. Because of the Russia-Ukraine war, I cannot go to Siberia anymore. So I just collected other materials throughout my life and then reimagined the landscape of a region that I cannot go to. So that was kind of like a collaboration, I thought. And then in animation, I think it's important to recognize the non-human, not only the technology, the techno other, but as well as as indigenous worldview, like the stones and plants, as you mentioned, like maybe ink, yeah, like all the other agencies.
You want to take that on? Because this idea of relationship, which everyone has mentioned, and the amount of time it takes to build relationship, and then the relationship with beyond just the human.
Yeah, that was fabulous. We were talking earlier today in class in our natural ink making. We're looking at a specific example of Koairaro Soil Collective from Aotearoa, from New Zealand. And it's a group of young people who have got together in the last couple of years and formed this collective deriving pigment from soil. And they're all Māori designers, ceramicists, artists working collectively together. And of course, soil has a particular resonance to us because our first person, Hene Ahu Amneh, was made from clay. So the soil, the word for soil is whenua. Whenua also means like many other things. So it means land, it means home. It also is the word for placenta. So in a way, it refers back to the body. So when they're collecting the soil for pigments, they're not just collecting the soil, they're collecting specific histories from places. So a really beautiful aspect of their practice is that they go where the soil is collected from, they host workshops and they work with showing people how to work with the pigment and taking those skill sets and that knowledge, that mataranga knowledge, back to that community that the soil comes from. So that was a nice example we looked at in ink, but there's of course examples of relationship to the inanimate, to the more than human kin, from many different things, places, everywhere.
I mean, the idea that the process is as important, sometimes more than the product, is really resonating here, right? And of course, in Western colonial things, they try and make the process so simple, like quick. Let's just make this quick so we can pump it out. And it's really resonating. And that came through with Amneh too, that the time spent together doing it, and then the relationships beyond just the people, and then the learning from the community. Go ahead. Yes, please.
So that sparks something. There's something very, very important about storytelling. And that's what everyone is brought up, and that handing, it's not just about handing down, but it is my story, your story, our story. It's that collective consciousness. And there's in some of the spaces where women gather together to make, that is also the place where they learn how to be. And I'm really interested to hear from everyone here. How do you see the storytelling being such an intrinsic part of what it means to be human through your practices? If I may ask a question.
I'm just going to link that back to something Juan said earlier about the tactility of working with materials and understanding them in an embodied way. And I firmly believe that with students and come into art and design because of some fundamental understanding of the pleasure of touch and whatever the materiality of the thing is that they're interested in that drives them, right? It's not just aesthetics and it's not just concepts, it's something really innate about the mechanism of between the hand and the eye, and touch is that kind of bridge. And I had to think very long and hard about how to address teaching decolonial design practices in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, of course, it being a very different scenario to my home country. And one of the things that we begin with is territorial acknowledgements in the first class. So we think about our relationship to place. And the students respond through a video I ask them to make of their own of how we know the land. So they're speaking often from their home villages or towns or their backyard or their parents' house. But they put themselves somewhere and they speak to the place that they know best and introduce themselves through that. And so for me, that comes from my worldview of when we introduce ourselves, I would, in a formal setting, I would normally list my mountain, my river, my ocean, my lake, my iwi, my tribe, my hapu, my sub-tribe, maybe my grandparents, maybe my parents, and then myself. So I'm the last thing that I come from. I'm not the first thing. so that how we know the land conversation is very tied up in touch as a memory, as a connection point. And teaching that and thinking about that, it's always really interesting to bring people into, I guess, engaging with the authenticity of their own positionality, going, I'm from here and this river in my backyard is what I know best. And it is part of this unceded territory, or it's part of that place. This is the history that I understand of it, that I know about it. Yeah, so yeah.
That's super interesting. And you feel like tactility today is in some ways like fairly relegated to like the swiping of the finger on an LCD screen. So I feel like promoting that is like really important. But just in general, I feel like we have so much to learn from indigenous epistemologies. Like if we can move away from an anthropocentric hierarchical view of the world and like resources as resources to as a more horizontal way, like it's a whole kind of philosophical realignment of what we see. And, if you consider a tree or a mountain to have a right to be, then, like you can't see it as a resource anymore. Yeah.
Any of you? I'm just,
I'm gonna try and sort of make a question out of this, but I thought it was so interesting what you said, Lavinia, about how the arts and culture sector in South Africa was charged with, or was given the responsibility for the soul of the nation. And so there's kind of a top-down, or a top-down approach where there was sort of policy and regulation put in place that empowered artists to make a difference. And in questions like this, where there are forces at play that are kind of beyond us, like globalism, and production, what's it called, value chains. I don't know the lingo, but you know what I'm talking about. Where, in a sense, like as an artist or as an activist or as a teacher, it might really feel like difficult to make a difference. And I'm wondering from you all who are working in the academy and working as practitioners and researchers, if you feel that there's a complement to your work that's needed, from the government, or in terms of policy about things like planned obsolescence, or about things like, exporting cheap labor, all that kind of stuff that's actually working against the handmade and indigenous epistemologies and all these wonderful ideas that you're bringing up. So that, sorry, I kind of rambled. The question is, is there a corollary? Is there another side? Or, can it be done from the bottom up? Or does the top down and bottom up have to meet in the middle somewhere?
Thanks, Mark. I don't think there can be one approach, right? There has to, it's about the responsibility that you have in your realm. So are you an educator? Who do you educate? How do you educate? Are you a part of a faculty? Are you part of a university? What is your ecosystem? What is your influence? Where can you? And I think this is something that, with those kind of macro considerations, it is incredibly overwhelming. And you spoke about this and that grief, that overwhelm. How am I, going to make any kind of change? Mm-hmm. And that alone needs to be unpacked and decolonized, because there we go. We're again thinking that it's I and me alone. And it's one. And the example of how you introduce yourself, and we're in evolution, and we're a part of many different systems and many different faculties. So where can you do what you can when you can? And there have to be a whole multitude of people influencing policy, being the activists, but also being the artisans, being the lovers, being the people with kindness. And it can't be from one space.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else out there with a burning question? Don't be, oh my gosh, here we go. And we got you in the back after, okay?
It's not a question, it's actually a comment. So I'll be really, really quick and leave the question to our colleague. But in what you were just saying, Lavinia, you're right. Like we do connect to our communities and to our ancestors and to, you know, to our environment in the largest possible sense. But I was also thinking about 2 weeks ago, we were celebrating the National Truth and Reconciliation Day here. And some of us got to see the really wonderful movie by, I forget her first name, an Alanis, thank you, Obam Sawin, which documents Murray Sinclair, who led the Commission on Truth and Reconciliation. And at some point, he talks about the whole process and how daunting it is, and all of the recommendations that are offered to us to live in better harmony with, you know, across communities, but also with the land. And it's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of recommendations. There's something like 16 volumes. And then he says to us, to the people, you know, who were in the room and to the people watching the movie, don't try to do it all. There's no way you can do it. And if you try to do it all, you'll never start and do anything. So really start thinking about the realms where you actually, as a human being, have influence. And for the conversation that we're having, it's you know, being a consumer is one of the places where we have influence. Being a maker is one of the places we have influence, and being a teacher, an administrator, and so on. So to me, that's a little bit humbling, because it makes it very clear that it has to be a whole collectivity effort, but it also makes it really, really empowering, because we do have these places of influences when we actually think about it. And it really encourages us, I think, to think about leadership, which all of us can have access to. So that's all I have to say.
Merci. There was in the back there.
Thank you, everyone. I'm wondering whether we can...
Who are you?
Hi, I am visiting from Singapore, but otherwise from the West Coast, so unceded and ancestral Coast Salish territories. I'm thinking about a bit of a collective that I learned from during COVID times. I believe it's called Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures. A collaboration between South African activists and makers, and also colleagues in academia at the University of British Columbia and beyond. And there is something towards the end of their gift contract that says something about we are always in transition. And insofar as we are, as we move towards the transformative, from perhaps where we're starting off now, the transactional, that we need to gift ourselves the promise of continuous trial and error, continuous study and struggle together. If we understand one of these transactional currencies as language, and here I'm thinking about the vectors that the first colleague who asked the question actually mentioned. Is it top down or bottom up, or is it both? If we're thinking about directions, not in a linear path, perhaps in a centripetal or centrifugal way, and the ways in which perhaps we have learned from our colleagues in astrophysics or theoretical physics about the foldings and unfoldings of brains and planes and time, that allows us to dream as a way of remembering the future, then perhaps it is now, right, that matters. So echoing the comment from before, rather than thinking about perhaps the more ethical stance of responsibility, it's more about thinking about our agency and expanding it and sharing it within whatever organizational form we happen to be in, whether it's in the family, to the workplace, to the institution. And I'm looking at the love that is in everybody's chest. Some more obviously today than others, how that particular element that we bring to especially the university needs to be recognized. And it goes right back to the central provocation, I think, of today. The role of emotion, love as with anger, which is the flip side of love, that we do care already, otherwise we wouldn't bother to be here and be present when we know there are so many ways for us to gather in a way that doesn't require the physical anymore. And then also thinking about the role that technology can play, because we can speak across great distances now, and how that could be shared. So also a comment, I'm afraid, rather than a question.
There's no fear here. There's just
Beautiful comment.
yeah. Any reaction from the panel?
Just very, very quickly, I just remember something that Amneh said about compassion and humility and being changed by being yourself, allowed to be changed by each other's interactions, by like interacting with somebody and then being humbled and letting that change you in return. So it just made me think of that.
Right. How can it not, right?
Yeah, how can it not?
Yeah, how can it not?
But if you take that to heart and really implement it, I think it has like profound implications.
Lavinia, before you tell us where we can buy those love things. No,
it's all good. It's all good.
Anyone else? I mean, the Justice Murray Sinclair, oh my God. He also was someone who once said that social innovation is actually look back to what we've already been doing hundreds and hundreds of years ago as a social innovation. It's not something new that we have to figure out, right? We might already know it deeply within our tissues.
The theme that spiral, the circle, the circular, whether it is circular design, circular economies, whether it is a way of thinking and a way of being, a decolonization. And Amneh also mentioned the feminine, and I think the conversation we had today has really been a like an awakening of that, and it's very exciting. And the comment now as well, or the comments actually, yeah, the feminine and what that even means for whom, whom it means what for. So, yeah.
Anyone else on the panel want to pipe in? No? No. Lots of great looks though. I love it. But I know I want to meet your rocks. There were pet rocks, but these are real relationships with rocks. Yes. Oh, great. Thank you. Microphone, please. And we'd love to know who you are.
Hi, I'm Holly. I'm in Miranda's class. I'm from BC as well. I was interested, somebody said something about fast food and how like we want the fashion, and how we wanted like the fashion kind of, overconsumption to be like fast food. And I'm like, I definitely still eat fast food, but like I see where we're going with that. And I kind of feel like my comment that related those two things was like accessibility, and how like a lot of times like people have to eat fast food because it's like the cheapest thing. It's like what's accessible. And I feel like being a young person in like the fashion world, especially with like social media, is like a really interesting like situation, because obviously we're all really trying to be environmentally conscious, but also with like trend cycles having shortened. Like I know that trend cycles used to be like 40 years until like a trend would come back, and now it's like 10 minutes, and all these like hyper niche like aesthetics, and you're trying to like I don't know how to describe it. You know what I mean? But my question or my comment, I guess, is kind of around like, I feel like there's kind of this rise in both like fast fashion where it's like everybody's buying fast fashion, everybody, because like you're trying to like keep up with those cycles. But at the same time, I feel like there's this crazy rise in like thrifting and making, and what Miranda was saying about like, I wrote it down, maker's mark and imperfections, and like having that uniqueness, I feel like is really important. But I am wondering like where you think that will go, because I feel like they're both like rising really intensely, if that makes any sense. And obviously like there's going to be a plateau. But at the same time, like I can't speak for everybody, but like I'm also really broke and I also like pretty things. And I feel like that's like very part of being human. So kind of that like intersection of like fashion and style, and like obviously we want things that are nice, and it's kind of all like accumulating and like rising, and like where do we go after that? And also there's already so many clothes in the world, so what do we do with all of those clothes? And I'm overwhelmed, and that's my comment. So yeah.
Anyone want to grab onto that question?
I think one, and I will tackle that one.
Sure.
That was a really good comment, because you drew our attention back towards the issues of equity, which we'd moved away from, right? Yeah. And it is something that comes up in thinking in design school, when you're being taught about slow design and all these beautiful, slow, authentic processes of seasonal, local, relational making, to come up with a product that has taken so much time that you yourself, the maker, are excluded from being able to participate in the purchase or consumption of that thing, right? Because if you value your time, then how could you possibly afford that thing? So you're bringing our attention back to the privilege of that's inherent within consumption processes, and fast fashion offers a toehold in. It trickles down from couture and gives an accessible way to feel a part of the milieu of what is happening in a seasonal, trend-orientated way. I guess I also feel like you answered your own question in a sense, because you know the alternative or the anecdote to that is you know, coming to terms with your own authenticity as a human, who you want to be and how you want to be represented. And then all these amazing practices around thrifting, care and repair of things. And then the attaching value in a meaningful way to those things, because you have touched it with your hands and entered into that relationship of tactility with it. And it now has more meaning to you. You've customized something, you've adapted something to fit you, you've mended it when it had a little rip, and now suddenly that thing is different to somebody else's, and you're less likely to throw it away. You're more likely to attach meaning and hold meaning to it.
One.
Me, yeah. Just maybe briefly, I don't have a ton to add to what you said. But just thinking that, yeah, the issue of like equity and accessibility is a real one, and it's a challenging question because of that. But I do, to your question about what the future of fast fashion might be, I think it's like for fast fashion or the equivalent in like objects or furniture and all of that, the environmental cost of that is not usually accounted for in the price, which I feel like that's something that will change, hopefully.
I mean, that would be an amazing sort of systemic kind of adaptation for governments to do, right? Yeah. So if particular manufacturers are culpable for pollution to X amount, what cost goes back to that person? And likewise, we see that in sort of citizen-led movements where people like Fashion Revolution, for instance, where people are encouraged on a yearly day. It's a legacy of the Rana Plaza disaster. Where people are asked to post and share on social media and ask the question of who made my clothes. And so they post a picture of their clothing and they put pressure on the manufacturers to be transparent about what the actual, who made their clothes and where that came from. But imagine if
culpability kind of went full circle like that. And the only way to do that as consumers is to know that you do actually have power, that you have a voice, and you have a right to go back to your manufacturer and say, hey, this garment I bought from you fell to pieces within 2 minutes. Why? Like what is your manufacturing process? What is this material you've used? Like, there's a lot of ability to pressurize those chains, those systemic chains within an industry by questioning it. And because of this global communication of being able to speak to people across places, you see that happen now through social media, that people are able to kind of, one person can challenge a company's ethos and ask for transparency. And then you're making a decision that's informed, right? Yeah.
So, yeah,
I was going to say real quickly, just in terms of policy, like imagine if we had a tax on objects based on their environmental impact, that would shift it, things to the local and the handmade instead. I think that's a good idea.
I think that's a good idea too. I mean, don't forget those. I'm looking at you. You're all artists, so you're right. I'm in with you. You figure out a way to start making this more evident. I will be there with you, because I think it's the way that it's going to make people look. They're not going to read 50-page documents. They're going to see something like Nan Golden did, right? They're going to say something and it's going to move us. So I'm in with you. I'm in with you on this. And I'm out on this too. So we're running down time. All right, I think that's it. Thank you. I don't even know. We didn't even talk about scale and the wrong scale, and anyways, and rethinking. I'm not prepared. I'm not. Anyway, lots of thank yous. This has been incredibly uplifting for me and thought-provoking. So I can't thank you all enough from my heart, because it's not what most of my days look like. I'd like to thank ELIA for holding these conversations around the world, year after year, week after week. I'd like to thank Manchester Met for giving us the chance to be part of their little conference in a city that brought us the Buzzcocks and Joy Division and Happy Mondays. And, oh my God, the list goes on. Fourth Space for hosting us so expertly and seamlessly. Amneh Shaikh-Farooqui for putting the provocative back in the word provocation. Miranda, Lavinia, Alyssa, and Juan for taking the time to be here, giving us your expertise for free, and your thoughts and your kindness and generosity of spirit. Thank you so much, and making my job super easy. And all of you in the audience, thank you so much for showing up and offering your energy and your comments and your questions. I can't thank you enough. So everyone here and out there and wherever you are invited to join upcoming satellite sessions hosted in locations around the world in the coming days, as we will see on slides that will be put up on the projector soon. So there's ways of joining conversations around the world, like some people did here, I think. I don't know. A recording of the proceedings will be on the Fourth Space YouTube account afterwards. Like all of the Fourth Space content, you'll spend hours looking at that stuff. It's super interesting. We're thrilled to be able to have participated in ELIA's Leadership Symposium. We're waiting to see how the Manchester Provocations shapes up. And once again, thank you all so much for being part of this and turning my day around completely. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. That's amazing. You're so lucky. You are so lucky.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And I'll just second all of Andrew's thanks, because that's, thank you. Thank you for the thanks. I appreciate you all for coming in, and of course for being involved in questions. Of course, that's really what brings this thing together, makes conversation happen. Everyone online, also in the space, just thanks again. We'll be closing up the Zoom and the live stream now, but just remind you, as Andrew also just said, it will be available immediately on our YouTube channel. So you can revisit it there.